I'm starting on an uncommon subject called Thoracic Outlet Syndrome, but it may come as an exam patient. Now, we have to know a good amount of anatomy before we go for this. One of those conditions where anatomical knowledge is very important. Unfortunately, due to several reasons, when you come at a postgraduate level, the amount of anatomy that you remember, unfortunately, is very small. Is clearly audible now today? My talk is audible, am I right?
Yes,
Yes,
audible,
yes,
sir.
yes.
Okay. So what I'm trying to tell you is that you learn anatomy. We used to learn anatomy for 18 months. In your case, is reduced to only about, they say 1 year, but gets reduced to nearly about 9 to 10 months. So in fact, at many PG clinics, I had a 11th commandment. I used to say, thou shalt not ask an anatomy question. But today we have to learn some bit of anatomy before proceed further. Please remember, we have a costoclavicular canal which takes the structures from the axial skeleton to the appendicular skeleton. Unfortunately, I would not call unfortunately, anyhow, when a human being became a biped animal, the position of the scapula as well as humerus moved posteriorly. As a result of that, the costoclavicular canal gets drastically reduced in size. Our interest, of course, there are 3 spaces. You can make out, you look at this picture, there are 3 spaces, which is, the first is the interspine space, interscalene space. The second is the costoclavicular space. And the third is the space behind the pectoralis minor. The third space, you're all very familiar. Can anybody tell me why? The space behind the pectoralis minor, most postgraduates are very, very familiar.
Lymph nodes.
That's right.
Breast.
Yeah.
Rotus. Rotus.
Yeah, any axillary dissection, you have to use the third space. We are not talking costoclavicular today. We are talking only about the first syndrome, the first space, the interscalene syndrome. Understand? Now, the etiological factors will come to a little later. Now, this picture shows the space very well, where the main interscalene space is bounded by the scalenus anterior anteriorly, scalenus medius posteriorly, and the first rib forms the base. As such, you can see the subclavian artery coming out, as well as the brachial plexus, especially T1 is most important for us. Now, I want you to remember one important fact. If you see on the right-hand side corner, you can say subclavian vein. People have described subclavian compression, extremely uncommon to see subclavian vein compression because it is anteriorly placed and is not within the canal. Understand that? I go back to the anatomical factors. So we have a certain factor which can cause this disease. One is a congenital complete cervical rib. Details we'll discuss later. You have an incomplete rib with a fibrous band connecting to the first rib. And then a prominent scalenus anterior, which in the days gone by was known as scalenus anticus syndrome. You also have an abnormal insertion of the scalenus medius. At this stage, we have to know a little bit of anatomy of the scalenus muscle. Scalenus anterior, anybody can tell me the origin? Anterior, scalenus anterior origin insertion. Scalenus anterior, I have shown the picture. Look at the picture, you'll know.
Scalene tubercle.
From the first rib.
So
Scalene tubercle of first.
Insertion is to scalene tubercle of origin I want. Origin. Anterior tubercles of vertebra, cervical vertebra, 3 to 6 comes down to get inside a scalene tubercle. Scalenus medius start from the posterior tubercles of 2nd to 7, gets inserted to the first rib, little behind the scalene tubercle. Scalenus posterior purposely are not shown, quite often is absent. When present, it is a very small muscle arises from the last 2-3 posterior tubercles and gets attached to the second rib. Therefore, in no way it comes into this particular triangle. Now, this again shows the same thing. You can see that, of course, they are saying shown all the 3 spaces here: scalene triangle, costoclavicular space, as well as the pectoralis minor space. Now, so we have to remember that The causes of thoracic inlet syndrome could be, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this point earlier. We call it thoracic outlet. It's a classical misnomer. The correct terminal should be, but nobody follows it, the thoracic inlet.
Inlet.
Structures get in, but nobody calls it inlet. But all the symptoms are at the inlet level, not at the exit level. Understand? So I said about prominent scalenus anterior. Then sometimes the scalenus medius gets inserted a little more medially. To that extent, you find it's closer to scalene tubercle, and therefore the space is further compressed. Now we have the nerves passing through the muscles, and we have sometimes passing through the scalenus muscle instead of coming between the muscle. And we have anomalous fibrous bands. And of course, acquired is just mentioned, is extremely rare. I have not seen one, exostosis of the first rib or fracture of the first rib. We have gone through these pictures already. Now, what about the history? Now, we have three distinct groups presenting with the thoracic outlet syndrome. Number one is a group which is very common. They have non-specific symptoms. What are they? They may have dragging pain coming down the limb. Pain is worse on exertion, especially certain occupations. For example, if the occupation demands uh, hyperabduction with extension, or occupation demands carrying heavy weights. I'll tell you a small story. During the Second World War in England, most of the men were taken to take part in the war. And many occupations which depend upon men fell on women, especially carrying heavy weights. When these thin women started carrying weight, the whole shoulder gets drooped down. It's pulled down because of the weight of the whatever they're carrying. As a result, the angle becomes much more accurate, the triangle becomes narrower, and many of these women started coming with symptoms referable to thoracic outlet syndrome. Understand that? But they have no specific symptom pointing out to either nerve or the artery. So next is depending upon the compression of T1. T2, C8 will come there, but C8 usually doesn't come into the picture. Some of the patients with post-fixed brachial plexus, T2 may be a little higher than usual, and then they may have some of these symptoms. Otherwise, it's primarily T1. If you know the anatomy of T1, all these are easily explained. They have pain that radiates along the medial side of the limb. They may complain of tingling and numbness. Later on, they may complain of weakness of the muscles. Which group of muscles, please? T1. Which group of muscles? T1. Which group of muscles? I said unless you know
Intrinsic.
intrinsic. What?
Hypothenar muscle
Hypothenar only.
and introsite.
Intraosseous.
Intraosseous muscle.
In fact, most small muscles of the hand, whether they go through median nerve or ulnar nerve, are supplied with the T1 segment. Understand that? We are not thinking of the nerve level now. We are at the trunk. Please remember, we are at the root at T1. Most small muscles of the hand are supplied by T1 segment, whether through the median or the ulnar. So it's not confined to when you come down. Suppose ulnar nerve injury or ulnar nerve division or a median nerve division, totally different story. Understand? Then the last group is what you're likely to see in the examination. These are people who complain of cramps, especially when they work. They may have later stages, symptoms of an ischemic limb. I don't have to mention that. They may have rest pain and gangrene. What's the important rest pain in general? In any ischemic limb, what does rest pain tell you? Any ischemic.
Critical limb ischemia.
Beg your pardon?
Critical ischemia.
Limb ischemia means what?
About to go into gangrenous changes.
Threatened limb.
Pre-gangrenous.
Unlike the lower limb, intermittent claudication can go on for months together. Please remember, of course, there's no relevance to today's discussion. Just as a piece of information, people with intermittent claudication, they can go on for months together, but once they get rest pain, as rightly put it, it becomes a critical limb ischemia, and unless you tackle the condition early, they're doomed to go into the next stage of gangrene. Now, what do you find in examination? You may find a palpable rib. How do you recognize? You'll find a hard structure in the supraclavicular fossa. upper and lower borders are very easily made out, totally immobile, especially in thin people, the rib is palpable. That is a cervical rib which is palpable. Is the first rib palpable through the clavicle, under the clavicle? Yes or no? Quick.
No, sir.
No,
How
sir.
can you not? It's so deeply placed. In the absence of a rib, you may find evidence of supraclavicular tenderness, which is totally not reliable. Just because there is tenderness, you can't say your patient has this TOS. Then the next group are those who come with neurogenic symptoms. What are they? They may have paresthesia on the medial side of the limb, running down along the limb. They may have an area of paresthesia. Then, before the total wasting, they may have reduced muscular power. You know what are the motor grades? You number them. Grades of motor power. Number.
5.
1
4
to
is the
5.
top.
5 is
5
not 5.
is 5 is
5.
normal. Okay, fine. Right. We won't waste time. Then further, if you wait further, you may find wasting of the small muscle. Many of our patients come at the stage of wasting of the small muscle of the hand. Luckily, sensory deficit is either absent or minimal. Explain. Explain. Sensory deficit is either absent or minimal. Explain.
Sensory root in the nerve is placed
Beg
very
your
much.
pardon?
The sensory
Even
root.
contains no sensory fibers. We have
No,
already
sir, it
talked about
does.
It
paresthesia, etc.
contains.
Huh?
It does, but it is present on the inside of the nerve.
What the
central part of
correct
the nerve.
answer at postgraduate level is overlapping sensory nerves. There is so much overlapping, and therefore the sensory deficit is either absent or minimal. It's because of overlap. Now, what do you find in examination? In the vascular case, this is what you see in the exam. You may find weak or absent peripheral pulses. You got to know exactly where to feel the pulse. Much easier in the upper limb compared to the lower limb. I won't go into details. If you measure the blood pressure, probably on the affected side is less than 20 millimeters minimum difference on the affected side compared to the normal side. If you're lucky, you may feel a thrill or hear a bruit in the supraclavicular region. Now, can you have a bruit without a thrill? I want an
Yes,
answer.
sir.
Yes, can you have a thrill without a bruit? Quick.
No.
No, that's right. You can have a bruit without a thrill, but you cannot have a thrill without a bruit. Okay. Now, further, you find if signs of ischemia, I won't go in details, even MBBS student know, loss of air, thinning of the muscle, shining muscle, changes in the nail bed, and changes in the pulp of the finger, all those things. What I want to impress here is the weakness or the wasting of the muscles may be more than what you expect due to pure neurogenic involvement. When the nerves are involved, wasting is confined only to the small muscles of the hand. But here, because of ischemia, even other muscles get wasted. And how do you make out wasting? By measurement of the girth. So please remember, in these cases, you got to measure the girth and demonstrate muscular wasting, which is a sign which you do not usually, which is forgotten ischemic limb. The rest of things you remember, but muscular wasting as a sign is quite often forgotten. Specifically, I mentioned. Therefore, of course, what you get in the exam more often than not is dry gangrene. Now, what are the clinical tests? Various tests described. Adson test is one that is very familiar. You want me to give the details or shall we pass on? All of you know how to do Adson test. Okay, let me mention. You make the patient sit up, feel the radial pulse, ask the patient turn the face to the affected side and ask him to take a deep breath. Then at the same time, you hyper-retract and extend the limb. If the pulse becomes weaker or disappears completely, you say absence is positive. Who does absence most often in the present day? Which specialty performs absent test as a routine? Of course, they do further investigation. They don't go by absent test alone.
Orthopedicians.
Orthopedicians.
I'm sorry.
Physiotherapy.
Cardiologists, they want to use the radial artery for coronary replacement. They start with absence. Of course, they don't end up with absence. They do many other tests. Yeah, right. And the Roos test is the one that is commonly performed where you make the patient sit up, with his shoulders abducted at 90 degrees, elbows flexed at 90 degrees again. Ask the patient to go on, close and open the hand repeatedly for about 2 to 3 minutes. If the patient complains of pain, you say Rus is positive. Then there's a rice test I have not mentioned here, wherein you hyperabduct and extend the hand above the head, turn the face to the opposite side, ask the patient take a deep breath, and then as you're hyperabducting at a certain level, the patient may complain of pain, then you say heart stress is positive. These four are provocative tests where you induce pain by a maneuver. Syriac described a test where the pain is made less. Can anybody tell me Syriac test? You stand behind the patient, ask the patient to flex the elbows at right angles, hold on to the elbows and trying to lift the elbows. When you lift the elbows, the shoulders automatically get elevated. When the shoulder gets elevated, the neck muscles are relaxed and the triangle becomes a little more capacious. And this is one of the tests of relaxation. But unfortunately, all these tests are done more for the examination's sake. With the advent of various imaging techniques, these tests are lost are important. But unfortunately, as I said, every day I've been repeating this statement, examiners come in different shapes and sizes. So I may insist that you at least perform the test and mention the test and then know the limitation. The limitations are you can get false positive, you can get false negative. So these tests are, to my mind, important from the examination point of view, but especially the older generation examiners still believe that the students will perform a good clinical examination. A point I wanted to emphasize from day one. Unfortunately, the time spent with the patient on clinical examination is getting drastically reduced. And this results in the patient thinks the doctor is so busy, he has no time to listen to me, no time to examine me. In fact, I have done a lot of work in this direction. This is something I'm interested. You may be surprised to hear that when a patient is talking, a doctor interrupts the patient at the end of 16 seconds when I made my first oration. I forget the name of the oration. By the time I came to my third oration on a similar topic, the time had been reduced to 12 seconds. Today, there are people who don't touch a patient at all. I've had experienced patients come with a complaint. In fact, I got about 5 decades of experience as a practitioner, as a teacher. Anyhow, at the later stage of my career, most patients will come to me for a second opinion. They come with a big bundle of all scans possible in the city of Mangalore at that time. And sir, we have been told that such and such an operation necessary. I said, please go into my examination room. And my statement was, I never treat scans, I treat patients. I think you should remember, most of you will end up in the private sector, either in corporate or your own hospital. The time you spend with the patient is worth it because the level of confidence increases. I feel one of the reasons for lack of trust, which is responsible for violence, litigation, everything you say, is the time spent by the doctor with the patient has come down considerably. So when you perform all these tests, to my mind, at least the patient feels, oh, this doctor is interested in my welfare. This doctor wants to examine me carefully. He wants to get all the details possible. To that extent, it adds to the confidence level. Politicians talk of confidence building measures, CBM. Kashmir issue, every time there is to be CBM coming across the press. So these are CBM, confidence building measures. Otherwise, these tests have very, very limited value today. Now, before you go further, I got to study the changes in subclavian artery. First, how many, I'm sorry, there are only 3 parts. What divides the subclavian 3 parts? What structure divides subclavian artery into 3 anatomical parts? Please, quick.
The rib, first rib.
Pectoralis.
Scalene anterior.
Scalenus anterior. How can pectoralis be?
Pectoralis
We're
minor.
talking of the axillary artery, my dear boy. This is scalenus anterior. The one
Scalenus
proximal to that is the first part. Luckily, no changes. Why do I say luckily no changes? This is the important coming out of the first part. At least name the important ones.
What
Name.
difference that?
Quick pardon?
Vertebral artery.
Vertebral,
arteries.
vertebral artery and internal mammary.
Internal thoracic vertebral arteries.
That's right. Very good. Excellent. So it is now we are into the second part. Now what happens the second part? Number one, the rib is the cervical rib or a fibrous band or a prominent or whatever factor I mentioned earlier is directly compressed because that forms the anterior wall and it compresses upon the rib or upon the artery. Now, what does compression lead to? Constant mechanical irritation. Sorry, N is missing there. Irritation leads to intimal damage. Whenever intimal damage, physiology, you know, there is a thrombus formation, and the thrombus to that extent narrows the lumen. Further, constant mechanical irritation by the rib on the adventitial coat of the artery produces fibrosis. Fibrosis leads to thickening of the wall. So as a result of both these factors, the lumen of the second part is considerably narrowed. Occasionally, there is total obliteration of the lumen. Suppose the second part of subclavian artery is totally occluded. What happens to the limb? What happens to the limb? Is it analogous to compression or a total occlusion of femoral artery in the lower limb, or things are different in the upper limb?
There are a lot of collaterals in the upper
Lot
limb
of
from the
collaterals.
first,
I will not ask
from the
you.
first part.
Collaterals are there.
That's right. There are a lot of, don't talk about this one, collateral circle around the scapula that occurs later for the axillary. Here the collaterals are different. I won't ask you collaterals. Obviously, you're not read about it. Now, the changes that are most interesting are in the third part. Instead of a stenosis, second part is expected because there is something sitting on, something compressing, and changes are expected. But what surprises you is that the third part, instead of being normal, undergoes dilatation. In the long run, this dilatation leads to aneurysm. Now, there are a lot of explanations for this. All these are hypotheses. So you have great advantage in the exam if there's hypothesis. What is it? What is it? Got a great exam. When one particular reason is not clearly understood, that many reasons, whatever you say, examiners are likely to accept it. The first thing we learned even as undergraduate was that the rib goes on rubbing upon the adventitial coat, wherein, if you remember your basic physiology and basic anatomy, the sympathetic plexus forms a plexus around the vessel. As a result of constant pressure by the rib, these vasoconstrictor sympathetic fibers are destroyed. As a result, there's a reflex vasodilatation. Whether the dilatation advocate to form an aneurysm, all of us have our own doubt. But this is to satisfy the examiners, and that is what you are primarily interested in now. Number two, the second is what is called the Venturi effect. When, this has been, of course, showed by experiments, when a fluid flows through a narrow portion, the speed increases. So what exits from the second part is more like a narrow stream. I'll come to a picture later. You see, unfortunately, at this particular level, the subclavian artery is not a straight tube. A straight tube, what would happen is the stream will pass faster. Here, the subclavian artery takes a turn. So what happens with this narrow stream? It comes and hits a particular spot in the subclavian artery. Now, you've seen this in, if you belong to the areas where there's a large amount of rain in the rainy season. Suppose you have a tile roof and then you have a drainage pipe collecting all the rainwater coming from the roof, at the end of which it is allowed to fall down from a height of 15 feet to 20 feet. Even if you have a concrete floor, over a period of time, you find the concrete gets eroded and slowly you'll find a small pocket-like things try to form there. So it is said that when a stream, a jet of arterial blood hits a particular spot on the arterial wall constantly, that wall becomes weaker and tends to dilate. Unfortunately, this theory does not explain the fusiform dilatation, which occurs in all directions. Here you can get a bulge at a particular site, something like what you see in a false aneurysm. So this explanation also is not completely accepted. The third one is the one which probably is the one that is most probably likely to accept it. It is said that when the blood exits the second part, it induces intense vibrations. These, see, we have the elastin fibers that binds the collagen together in the arterial wall. As a result of this intense vibration, these elastin fibers are destroyed. That means the bond between the collagen fibers become weaker, and this causes dilatation. This probably is the one explanation which is most likely to be accepted. I'll show you one picture. I'll come back to you again. This picture will explain what I have been trying to tell you. So now, before I proceed further, there's something radically wrong with these pictures. Can you tell me what? There's something between the upper portion and the lower half. I'm giving a clue with an arrow. There's something radically wrong in this picture. What is wrong with this picture? I picked up this picture, realized the mistake, but I thought I'll ask the PGs to identify the mistake. Quick.
Direction of flow.
Direction of the flow, my dear girl.
Between
First part, you have the
cervical rib is below the artery.
cervical rib is no, that's the first rib, Baba. Cervical rib is compressing the artery. It is, of course, they're shown in the reverse direction. No, more important, the rib is on the left side, the subclavian artery is on the right side. Can you make out that? The rib is on the left side, they're pointing an arrow. But what they're showing up above is the subclavian artery. And number two, you're perfectly right. The rib must have been placed above the artery and not below the artery. And it's behind, so it's difficult to demonstrate. But this shows what I'm trying to tell you. Can you see that now? Suppose you have a stream running directly from the arrow. It will go and hit the artery somewhere at this point. Can you see my finger now? I don't know. Can you see my finger? May not be. So anyhow, so that's the second part, but that does not give rise to fusiform dilatation. I go back to my previous slides. So as a result of dilatation, you get an aneurysm. What happens inside aneurysm? Anywhere, eddying and pooling of the blood, and that leads to a thrombus. It's not the thrombus that's important, but the microemboli from these repeated microembolization leads to digital artery getting blocked because they're end arteries, and more often gangrene is restricted to one finger. Again, a question, why? Why gangrene is restricted to one finger? Because the palm has excellent collateral circulation. You have a superficial palmar arch and a deep palmar arch, and only the digital arteries are end arteries. That's why you may have gangrene restricted to digits and not extending on to the palm. Now, what are the investigations? Please remember, if you see a rib on a routine X-ray, kindly don't do any investigation. What's the incidence of cervical rib in the general population? Any idea?
10%.
Baapre, that means every 10th patient examined will have an abnormal rib.
3%.
0.5%.
0.5%. Now, luckily you can't go beyond 100. There's one great advantage. Unlike other places, you can go beyond 100. It is said most textbooks give a percentage of 1. These are Western figures. I don't have Indian figures. So those patients, usually when I take clinics for undergraduates, I find couple of students, more often girls than boys. Sir, I'm feeling something very hard in my neck, cervical rib. Some of them will go to the extent of getting an X-ray done and then coming and see me. Sir, will I develop gangrene, blah, blah, blah. This is called typically, what's the name given for this? Come on.
Second year
Medical students.
Why second year? Your PGs are so far superior, is it? You have become so wise. It's called medical student syndrome. There are postgraduate medical student syndrome. I won't mention it now. Don't think it's confined only to second year. All year medical students have their own syndrome, but the syndromes differ. That's the only thing. Sometimes they have to see a surgeon, sometimes they have to see some internal medicine, sometimes they have to see other specialty. I dare not mention now. So investigations are only for symptomatic patients. And please remember, this is a very important fact you have to learn today, that a diagnosis of TOS is made by a process of exclusion. You have to exclude other conditions which can cause similar symptoms in the nerves as well as in the vascular system. For example, For example,
Carpal tunnel.
carpal tunnel is
Tunnel.
much more common than TOS, and people come in small muscle and more often than not have carpal tunnel. More important, more important.
Cervical
Disc
spondylosis.
prolapse.
Very good. Excellent answer. We'll come to that when we investigate. Sorry. And for vascular, atherosclerosis involves subclavian artery. Please remember, patients with collagen disease like vasculitis can have lot of symptoms referable to vascular system. And even if they have a rib, make sure that the rib is not the cause, but the vasculitis or collagen disease. Please remember this. So this is a disease that is diagnosis by exclusion of other conditions. Now, what are the investigations? Of course, they start with X-ray. I'm sure all of you seen this, but this is a classical cervical rib, which is a complete rib, which gets inserted to the first rib. Lady was talking about cervical spondylitis, that always get an AP and lateral views of cervical spine before you decide on treatment, because the radiculitis or involved intervertebral disc prolapse can produce a picture which is similar if it is between C8 and T1, involves a T1 nerve. Picture may be very similar, and I have seen patients coming to me after an supraclavicular surgery, and the pain persists, and then we are able to diagnose intervertebral disc prolapse, and of course, refer them to the orthopedic surgeon. A neurogenic group, you must have objective proof. No point in saying there is weakness, there is paresthesia. You have to do nerve conduction studies and demonstrate the presence of nerve deficit at this level before you venture on surgery. Please remember this. Tendency to operate on symptoms alone is gone forever. We have so many specific and investigations available now. Unless you demonstrate nerve conduction studies, please don't operate upon the neuro group. We come to a vascular group, which is important from exam point of view. The first is a non-invasive color Doppler that gives a lot of information. Is there a narrowing of the second part? Is there a dilatation third part? Is there a thrombus? What is the state? Are there any collaterals running across? All the information is given by color Doppler. In vascular surgical units where facilities are available for management at a further stage, we do a CT or more often MR angiogram. Again, I want to stress this point. You will not do an MR angiogram unless you've got a vascular surgeon who is competent to tackle this problem. Otherwise, it's only of academic interest. So better to send such patient to a hospital where facilities are available for correcting whatever abnormality the vascular surgeon has determined following an MR angiogram. MR is superior to CT because double investigation, double cost, forget about it. It's superior because not only the vascular abnormalities, soft tissue abnormalities are also made out better with an MRI scan compared to a CT scan. Western books will mention both. In India, thanks to economic reason, I think we should restrict ourselves to only MRI. Now, treatment. For the first group, that non-specific group which I mentioned, where symptoms are vague, symptoms are like dragging pain down the arm and the forearm. Treatment is, first of all, shoulder girdle exercises to improve the tone of the muscle. Physiotherapy to relax the neck muscle, they got their own methods. Some of people have got a habit of sleeping with their shoulder extended and abducted. That's a bad position for patients who have got this syndrome. Ask them to change their sleeping posture. Pain relief, occasionally may need pain relieving drugs. It's easier said than done. People are carrying heavy weights. You can tell them change your work. You know the workforce in this country, the limitations. So change your occupation is mentioned in practice extremely difficult. Now, those who come with neurogenic group, the treatment depends upon the anatomical abnormalities. There is a time when for all patients with neurogenic abnormality, only a scalenectomy is done. This is not the correct answer. You got to decide what is the cause. And then scalenectomy may relieve the symptoms when the scalene looks very prominent and the scalene appears as if the scanless anterior is compressing upon the structures. Under those circumstances, scalenectomy. Now, something very interesting. Even in the presence of a cervical rib, for patients with neurogenic group, many surgeons perform excision, the first strip, through a transaxillary approach. It actually goes by the name of RU again. Can anybody explain? Even I'm saying a patient has cervical rib and he has got symptoms due to pressure upon T1. See, remember, you have a triangle, roof and the floor. Roof is the cervical rib, floor is the first rib. Now, the moment you take out the floor, again the triangle gets opened up, pressure is relieved. But why do you prefer the first rib resection to a cervical rib resection? Come on. Quick, 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 quick. I have no timer with me here. Can anybody tell me the time? Tell, what's the time, please?
Gravity.
Just time, what's the time, please?
230.
2:30,
240.
okay. 2:30, yeah?
240.
235.
2:45, okay, right. That means I must, come on, tell me. Why?
It widens the costoclavicular canal.
Oh, this patient has no costochalical symptoms at all. We are talking interscalene triangle only today. I am not talking costochalical. Costoclavicular, you have to take out the first rib, no question at all. You can't take out the clavicle, obviously. Technically, if you've seen a cervical rib being removed or a cervical sympathectomy being performed, today, of course, we don't bother about it. You have such important structures. Please remember, on the medial side, I'm talking of cervical sympathectomy where you should take out the stellate ganglion. On the medial side, you got the interjugular vein. Below, you got the apex of the lung covered by the lung covered by Simpson fascia. Above, you got the rib. And in between this space, to take out the cervical rib can be extremely difficult. Understand that, whereas transaxillary can take out the first rib. You are not looking at these structures at all. Understand? If at all, a subclavian vein sometimes comes in the picture. You don't see subclavian artery, you don't see the cervical sympathetic chain, nothing. And first rib excision is technically much easier. And once you remove the floor, the space opened up, symptoms disappear. That's why patients with now, if don't prefer scalenectomy, can straight away take out the first rib, equally good results. Understand? We tend to take out the cervical rib as we learn later in the next group only. All patients with neurogenic symptoms do need post-operative physiotherapy because they have wasted muscles and you have to improve the tone of the muscles. Now the vascular, we come to the last one. Now these are patients who need an extensive surgery. And today, if there is involvement of the second and third part of the subclavian artery, these patients are best treated by vascular surgeons. The days gone by before vascular surgery reached to such an extent, what we were doing, I won't recommend it now, but we were doing it, having resected the cervical rib, we used to add on a cervical sympathectomy to improve the blood flow because the vasoconstrictor fibers to the limb are denervated. To that extent, there's vasodilators, especially the collateral. Main artery is gone, but the collaterals dilate, and that is the principle lumbar sympathectomy in the olden days done for patients with ischemic lower limb. Of course, today nobody does it. You know, the reason why patients got ischemia, the sympathetics already have the sympathetic effect absolutely minimized. The vessels are dilated to the extent possible thanks to nature's way of reducing the sympathetic tone and allowing the vessels to dilate. By taking out the sympathetic chain, you may not improve the blood flow. But that was the only thing available for surgeons in the past, having removed the cervical rib with I told you the structures. You have to be extremely careful. You've got to pull the subclavian artery up. You've got to push the apex of lung down. And you've got to be very careful interjugular vein. In between that, you identify the stellate ganglion sitting there on the transit process and then take it out. Extremely difficult operation. But today, these are better handled by vascular surgeons. What do? They resect the disease segment. The second and third part both are resected and replaced by a long saphenous vein graft. And of course, with the gangrenous finger, you've got to amputate. There are some recent trends. I have no experience. I just taken down from whatever information I have from the recent articles. One is they have tried injecting botulinum a toxin interscalene anterior, and to that extent is supposed to give a lot of relief. I have no experience. And of course, vascular surgery advanced so much that in many places, instead of going in and doing all these things, they do a percutaneous placement of endovascular stents across the disease segment. These are the recent trends. So I think I'll stop with this. And I made a commitment to Dr. Radhakrishnan. On Monday, I'm going to talk on unknown primary. We used to call it occult primary, where a patient presents with a lymph node swelling in the neck as the only clinical symptom. Time, Dr. Radhakrishnan will tell you, it is to be on Monday. He'll fix up the timing. In addition to that, if you're very keen, Dr. Radhakrishnan said he'll try to get a list from you people. And if I'm competent, I'll join you. Otherwise, Monday probably will be the last class. Thank you very much. I hope you have learned something today.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Any questions, please?
Can I speak, sir?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
Sir, myself, Dr. Ishwar, Professor of Surgery, KIMS Hubli.
Oh, please.
Excellent. We're delighted to hear you often and often since last 2-3 decades, sir. Once again, I thank you very much for the excellent talk. Recently, I had one of the national conference. There is a presentation on thoracic outlet syndrome. Whatever the newer gadgets of investigations are still there in the scenario, it is still the absolute clinical evaluation is the absolute and gold standard methodology to diagnose the thoracic outlet syndrome, sir. Do you still agree with you, sir?
Yes, 100%. Because that's what I'm trying to tell all the time. Clinical examination is taking a background. People don't touch a patient at all. They look at the scans and then come to a treatment. I'm very happy, Dr. Ishwar.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Honestly, there's nothing, sir. Because I think this is the most important confidence building measure, more than anything else. And to some extent, unfortunately, we as teachers also have to take the blame. Because so much is talked about, when you see a laparoscopy video, it looks so beautiful, 3-dimensional colored video, you get totally absorbed. But with due apologies, I'm not saying not important. From the exam point of view, probably you're not there. First day, I talked to them on ulcer and swelling. And I thought some student must have felt insulted that we are going for the MS exam and this old man is talking about ulcer and swelling, and at the end of of course, they realized that they had some lacunae even in that as far as ulcer and swelling are concerned. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishwar. It's a pleasure.
Sir, one more, sir. With the advent of the thoracoscopic approach, probably one may be confident to do that. But many of the times, the exact cause for the symptomatology is very difficult to assess. If you can go through the neck approach, you can do scalenotomy, you can excise the band, and you can take out the ribs. All these options are available. That's why I'm still comfortable with doing with the supraclavicular approach. So what about your opinion, sir?
Thoracoscopic, what I'm saying, can you excise cervical rib through a thoracic VAT?
Not possible. Not possible. Not possible.
Even a first rib excision is difficult through a thoracic.
Yes, sir.
Exactly. I still believe that some of these operations will hold the test of time despite all the new innovation that you learn.
Yes, sir.
So I fully agree with you. Still supraclavicular. Only thing is, I'll tell you, I'm sorry the time is up because I was working with Professor Srinivasan. At the end of about 1 year, a particular case came for cervical sympathectomy. He said, you do it. I don't know. God sitting inside. I said, I'll assist you for one more case, sir. Next case, I'll do. We didn't have special loops to pick up the arteries. We work in a government setup. So we took up one of those red rubber catheters, hooked it around, and Professor Srinivasan lifted it up. This is a man of 58, and the subsequent artery tore into 2.
Okay.
And he said, you blighter, must have some premonition, of course. We divide the sternoclavicular joint. We got a lot of student donated blood, and we were able to resuture subclavian artery, and the patient survived. But I'm saying, that's why I mentioned specifically about atherosclerosis. So I got to be careful in the elderly age group where arteries are atherosclerotic. Retraction of the artery is not such a simple task. And when muscular young PG assist me, I get more worried.
Yes, they may retract more. Nice. Thank you very much.
Please
you are a professor's professor.
Regards to all your Hubli friends. So many of them known to me. Please convey my
Definitely,
regards.
sir.
Okay. Thank you
Definitely,
very
definitely,
much.
sir.
I think we
Okay,
come
sir.
to
Thank you. Thanks a
end of
lot.
the
Thanks a
class.
lot,
Thank
sir.
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll see you again on Monday.
Fine. Right.
About 1 o'clock.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. Anybody else wants to have a comment or a question? Anyone?
Oh, I thought.
Sir, I have
Yeah.
a request, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Sir, unfortunately, I missed previous classes. I mean, the very first class of yours. Is there any way we can get them? I mean,
I see Dr. Radhakrishnan is trying to upload it on the YouTube, but it
Yeah,
takes a lot of
I'll do
time.
it because I'll do it when I get time, but that'll be done
Exactly.
soon.
Somebody,
thank you so much, sir. Much
somebody put a beautiful comment in Facebook. If you blighter, he didn't use the word blighter, I am using the word blighter. You blighters have no time to listen. Don't make us repeat the whole process. So it's time consuming and so if anyhow, I believe that we should help the students to maximum extent possible. In fact, one of my associates one day told me, sir, you're not even spoon feeding, you're doing a rice stew feeding. You know what? No, you must listen to my answer. I said, those days we had what is called as a Miller-Abbott tube, which is a very short life because it led to a lot of complications. Miller-Abbott tube is what the feeding jejunostomy does now. The tip of the tube is placed in the small intestine so that absorption is still better. So I told my associate, Dr. Prakash was then my associate, if I had a Miller-Abbott tube, I'll put that into the student's intestine and make sure that the absorption is 100%. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
So
so much.
nice.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure talking to you, young men and women. Thank you very much.
Thanks.